Today we're going to be talking about the USG Flex H series and mastering Nebula and local GUI management for the USG Flex H series. We're going to be talking about how you can manage the USG Flex H series in both Nebula and the cloud, and we're going to also talk about Cloud Sync and how the configuration is synced between the cloud and the local GUI. So let's go ahead and get started here. So when it comes to talking about the local and cloud GUI management, the first thing we need to talk about is the Nebula Cross Sync, because it's a very important feature that you need to understand. There are some caveats on how it works. So I'm going to kind of go over how that works and what specific things you need to look out for. The next thing we're going to talk about is the cloud GUI and then the local GUI. All right, so let's go ahead and get started on that. So when it comes to the Nebula Cross Sync, there's a couple of things that you need to understand, specifically when it comes to onboarding your device. Now, depending on what state your device is in before you onboard, will determine the initial synchronization of your configuration files and which way it goes. So for instance, if you have a USG Flex H series and it's already been configured in standalone mode, and you want to sync it, you want to actually put it into Nebula, you want to put it into service so that it connects with Nebula. That means the device already has a configuration file. When you connect that device to Nebula, it's going to take the configuration file for its initial sync from the device and sync it into Nebula. So it's going to push the local configuration file directly into Nebula itself. So that's for devices that have already got a configuration on the H series. So if you are already using a device in local standalone mode, you're only using the local GUI, and you have a customer that decides, hey, we want to go ahead and put this device into Nebula, you can go ahead and do that, and you don't have to worry about having to wipe the configuration or worry about having to reconfigure everything. It's going to take what's already on the local GUI, and it's going to push it into Nebula once it's already in Nebula. Now, if you have a device that's gone through the setup wizard, meaning that you've taken it out of the box, you've logged into local GUI, and you've gone through the setup wizard, the moment you go to the setup wizard, it's embedded with a tag that says, we're going to sync that initial sync going from Nebula to the cloud. From that device, it's going to take that configuration and it's going to put a tag on it so that when you connect it to Nebula, it knows to pull whatever configuration you have on there. So if you take it out of the box, log in, go through the setup wizard, it's automatically going to be flagged as the initial sync going from the device into Nebula itself. That means that even if you don't have anything configured on it, the moment you put that device into Nebula, it's going to take whatever local configuration you have on there. So that means that if you want Nebula to obtain whatever configuration file that's already on the device, you either have to have it already set up or have at least gone primarily through the initialization wizard, the setup wizard on the local device. Now, here's where it goes the other way around. If you have a device that you pulled off the shelf and it hasn't been assigned to an organization, hasn't been assigned to a site, you haven't even touched it, you haven't even logged into it, you haven't taken it out of the box. Well, if you ship that to a customer, say that you have a customer that you're sending a USG Flex 200 H2, and you're shipping it to a customer, it hasn't been opened. The moment you put the serial number and the MAC address and add it to Nebula, it's going to flag it as the initialization sync coming from Nebula Cloud to the device. So that means that if you were to ship this device to a customer and the customer opens it up, or your a network technician opens it up, and you've already assigned it into the cloud, and that person starts configuring it before it's online, and they go through 30 minutes, 45 minutes, and hours worth of configuration, the moment that it logs on, the moment you put it into service, the moment it has an IP address and connects to Nebula, it's going to wipe that configuration based on whatever in the cloud. So that means that while it's in transit, if you want to have it sync from the cloud to the device, you have to make sure that that device has not been placed online yet, meaning that it hasn't been taken out of the box, it hasn't been placed online. At that point, you can start configuring it on the cloud side so that you put the serial number and the MAC address, you sign it to a site and organization in the cloud, then you can start configuring it, and at that point, once they've logged into the device, or once they've connected that device into their WAN or their ISP and it dials home, it'll automatically then pull that configuration from the cloud. One more other scenario is if you transfer a USG Flex 8 series from one organization or site to another organization or site, that means that the initial configuration sync is going to come from the cloud to the device. Now, what I mean by initial configuration sync basically means that whenever you are adding the device to Nebula for the first time, or if you're moving it from one site to another. That's what I mean by the initial configuration synchronization, because it has to figure out, how are we going to pull the configuration? And these are the specific scenarios where it can go from one way or the other. So in short, basically, if you want to have the device initially pull a configuration from the cloud, you basically need to make sure that that device hasn't been touched. You need to make sure that it's still in the box, hasn't been connected to a WAN port. No one has gone through locally and gone through the configuration wizard. That means that you can ship the device to a customer. Then at that point, while it's in transit, you can go into the cloud, assign that device to the customer's organization and site, begin the configuration process, and then the moment that they connect that device to the WAN port, it gets an IP address. It will dial home, grab the configuration from the cloud, and that initial configuration sync will then pull that configuration from the cloud to the device. From then on out, it'll sync both ways. After that configuration sync has been done, the initial one, any change you make locally will be pushed to the cloud. Any change you make from the cloud will be pushed to the local side. Now, vice versa, again, if you want the device to pull the configuration from the local side to the cloud, you have to have already logged in, already have a configuration set up on that device, and then you can add it into your Nebula account. And at that point, it'll pull whatever information is on that firewall and pull it to the cloud. So this is specifically if you're on the firmware UOS 1.35, because that's where this whole configuration sync both ways for the initial configuration sync, what we see here in this table, and then also for the configuration going back and forth. So what's great about this is if you have a customer that has already was hesitant to move to the cloud because maybe there were some features that were missing, and I know that there were some features missing prior to 1.35. If they were hesitant to moving to the cloud and they were on standalone, they can now, if they choose to, move to the cloud without having to, lose the configuration. Because prior to this, especially on the Flex, or the older Flex series and the ATP series, it was either one or the other. You either had full local or full cloud. There was no in between. So if you wanted to take an ATP or a Flex model from the local side and put it into Nebula fully managed, you had to wipe the configuration completely and start fresh. On the Flex 8 series, that's no longer the case. So if you have a customer that already has a configuration and they want to move to the cloud, it's easy to migrate them to the cloud. And at that point, you have both local access and also you will have cloud access without having to redo the configuration or reset the device to factory defaults. All right. So next, let's talk about the cloud and local GUI. So let me go ahead and get we'll start with the cloud just because it's a lot easier, because with the cloud, you have the option to, you have an option on the cloud side to log into the local GUI, which is wonderful because it allows you to basically have the best of both worlds. And what I mean by that is that you can be logged into the cloud, and if you need to go directly into your device, from the device GUI, we can do that directly from the cloud using a link allowing us to log into it. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and bring up one of our devices here. And here we go. So here we have our Nebula dashboard. We have a location here. So right here we have a firewall. We have a USG Flex 200H. And this is basically a home firewall here. So for the GUI management, you're going to find that on the left-hand side, when you log into your Nebula account, you'll go down to Configure, and then you'll have Firewall. Now, what's wonderful about the new version in Nebula, the latest version of Nebula, is now you're going to find that the settings in the GUI are very similar to how the settings are on the local side of the firewall. So if we start from the very top and go down to port and interface, you'll see that you do have the ability to see all of your ports like you would as if you were locally connected to the device. So we can see what the port speed is. We can see what ports are being used. So we have, our WAN port 2.5 gig. We have port 3 as 1 gig, and then we have ports 4 and 5 at 100/full, more than likely because these are devices that are connected directly to, a fast Ethernet kind of connection. So here we can set up our interfaces. So we have an IP address, and then down here we have our different subnets. Now we can create VLANs like you would in the firewall. So this translates directly to the local GUI as well. So if you were to make a change here, if we were to change the subnet address, it will automatically sync to the local side of the firewall, and it takes just seconds for it to do that. So if we were to go in here and edit, you'll see that the interface properties are very much similar to what you would see on the firewall side of local GUI. So here we can set up a VLAN, give it a description, set the member type, set what members are part of that VLAN, give it an ID, and then set our subnet mask. So you get the same settings that you would on the local side on the cloud itself. If you want to add another interface, we can click on Add, and we have the ability to set up another interface. We can choose where we would like to set up the IP addresses for it. So here we have our address assignment. We can do static, we can do unassigned for the IP address, and then we can set up the DHCP server, where we can set up our DHCP addressing. Going back over to configuration, you'll see that we now have routing in the cloud. So routing, very similar to how you would see on the firewall. You'll see you can create a policy route for that. So new in Nebula, you'll see that you have your same criteria that you would find on the firewall. You'll find that you have your user, if you have it set up for user. You have your incoming, whether it be the interface, whether it be the firewall or any. You can choose your source address. So if you want to, you can come down here and choose your source addresses as well. And you have the ability to create an address object in Nebula now. So if we click on address, we have the option to create an address object similar to what we have on the firewall itself. Here, destination address, if we want to have it, the policy route set to a specific destination address, we can put that information in here as well. Now, what you will find that is missing here is that on the policy route, which you would see like on the Flex series or the ATP series, there was an option here specifically on your policy route for your specific services. That's not available yet. We do have service ports that you can add service groups, but for applications, we don't have the application option just yet. That's something that's going to be added in the future. So that means that if you have an application such as Skype or Zoom or any specific application where you want to have a policy route, that's going to be added in a future update. Next, you can specify your next hop. And what we have here is you'll see that we can specify a VPN tunnel as the next hop. Why would you want to do that? Well, if you have a policy route and you have a specific VPN tunnel, a site-to-site VPN tunnel, you can specify a policy route so that the traffic goes out a specific VPN tunnel. So that option is something that you see similar on the local GUI as well. We can also do network address translation directly in Nebula. And again, these features will translate directly back to the firewall. So if you make a change here, you can go into local GUI and you will be able to see those changes almost immediately. Next here, we can take a look and cancel that because we can save it. Let's go ahead and take a look at our network address translation. So if we want to do a network address translation, we can set that up. So under network address translation, we can then say for our port forwarding, if we need to do a specific port forwarding, we do virtual server. If we want to do a one-to-one NAT, if the ISP has provided you with a local or a public set of IP addresses, you can then map those specific IP addresses to an internal IP address. So you can put internal, you can put it as a custom, and put in the actual host IP address right here, or use an address object. Now again, if you do create an address object here, it will sync to the local side of your GUI, and it will provide you with that same address object that you created. So any address object you create in here, or user address, or sorry, user object that you create in Nebula will be synced to the GUI and vice versa. Now, for site-to-site VPN, you will see that we still offer the Nebula SD-WAN VPN, the Nebula SD VPN, and this is specifically for, this feature is specifically for if you have multiple gateways in Nebula for different customers or different sites. This allows you to quickly build a VPN between Nebula devices. So this is something that I've covered in a previous webinar, and this still exists in Nebula. However, if you want to connect to another VPN, another third-party gateway, or a ACP that may not be in Nebula, or another firewall that may not be in Nebula, that's when you would go to your manual links. So again, you'll see the same settings that you would find on the local side GUI. You have your IKE version, your type, your addresses, and then here is something that we've just added in Nebula. You'll see that for the peer gateway address, you now have the option for a primary and a secondary VPN WAN address, meaning that if you want to set up failover to the remote end, you can then specify the remote IP addresses for your VPN gateway. So if you want to connect to the VPN primarily on WAN port 1 on the opposite end, you'll put in that IP address or host name, and then the secondary IP address on the remote end or secondary host name can be placed here. And then we have the VPN failover. So if you click this option, have it do a check back to fall back to the primary once the primary comes back online. So this I know was missing in prior versions of Nebula, but now to mirror what's available on the local GUI, we now have this option to do a primary and a secondary. Now, if you want your side to be maybe like a dynamic side, what you can do is do a domain name IP and then set your IP address to all zeros, or you can set it to the actual interface. So right now I only have one WAN port. You can set it to that particular WAN port for the address for the interface. However, if you want it to be able to allow connections in, you can then just set it to all zeros. If you want to set it so that it pulls in whatever IP address is on the local side. So if you have a dual WAN yourself, just set it to all zeros, meaning that it will pull whatever the IP address is for the interface. And of course, down here we have our phase 1 and phase 2 settings. And then we also have the option to do a NAT rule. So a NAT rule, what we can do here, kind of like your SNATs and your DNATs on the older ATP and the Flexes, allows you to set up a original IP and map it to a IP address. Meaning that on your VPN tunnel, if one end that you're connecting to has a specific network scheme and your side has a specific network scheme and they happen to match and you cannot change those IP addresses for whatever reason, if you're not allowed to, or everything's been mapped and statically assigned and it's going to cause too much of a headache, change your DHCP ranges, you can keep your IP addresses the same on both sides, but what we can do is set up a NAT so that we can create a false IP address and map it to the actual real IP address. So when a customer wants to connect in, instead of connecting to the same network address, maybe 192.168.1.x, we can then have them connect to 192.168.10.x, and then we can map that to 1.x. So that's a new feature that is available on Nebula. Now, for our remote VPN users, we do have our remote access VPN. And what's great about the remote access VPN loads up is that we can use either A, the IPsec VPN client, the paid VPN client, What's great about that is you can easily do a provisioning from the firewall where it can grab the configuration and automatically apply everything, your pre-shared key, all the networks, it knows all that information. So it's basically a single click. All you have to do is log in with the username and password for the account user, and it will download the configuration script directly to the IPsec VPN client. That's option number one. Option number two is we now do support the built-in iOS, Mac OS VPN client, and also the Windows VPN client. For Android, you still have to use a third-party application, StrongSwarm VPN. But as far as Mac and iOS are concerned, and Windows, after you've created your VPN and you've got everything set up, so we go here, we set everything up. After you've gotten all of this set up, all you would have to do is click on this button here, and it will download a zip file that contains all of the scripts for Mac, OS, Windows, and also the IPsec VPN client. So you can automatically just install those. So what's great about that is you can get that script, you can download it, you can send it to a customer, and have them, install it. Now for iOS users or Mac users, we found that it's best to, when you get the script, it's best to send it to an iCloud address, because when you send it to an iCloud address for those users, all they would have to do is click on the script and install it. Now, as far as the installation goes, when you install the script, there is a security mechanism that prevents a person who is unauthorized from installing that script, because it does require you to enter in a username and a password of a specific user for the VPN. So you see here we have sign on with local users. We can either set up a local user database, like on the firewall, where you create a user object and you can apply that user object to be part of the VPN tunnel, or we can do sign on with Radius, or we can do Nebula authentication. Now, if you do Nebula Cloud Authentication, we would have to create an account, and this is how you would create the account here. So you fill in that information, and then that's the account they would use to authenticate themselves when installing the script. Because once they install the script, that information is saved. So all they have to do, for instance, on iOS, is just go into their VPN, click the radio to turn the VPN on, and the VPN tunnel will build almost instantly. Okay, so that's the VPN portion. Now, for security policies, you're going to see something very similar to what you would see on the firewall. You'll see that our security policies now look exactly like you would see on the local side GUI. It looks like a mess because I have a lot of rules on this machine, but you'll see that we have all of the rules that we have, and then our explicit deny rule at the very bottom. So it's mimicking what you would normally see on the USG Flex H series. Now, again, here we have, of course, our services, our sources, our denies, and our services set in a way that we can actually add or remove or create any type of firewall rule that we need to create. So this just gives you an example of the firewall and how it's set up. And then also, of course, at the bottom, we have our DDoS protection, and then we also have our session controls. So right now on this firewall, it's set to 1,000 sessions per host. And then, of course, it's going to be dependent on which firewall you have. So if you have the higher end firewall, it's going to be, you have the ability to set up 1 million sessions. But here we have the sessions, the default is 1,000. Now for security services, this is going to be your services like your content filtering, your application control, your IP exception, DNS filtering. I'm not going to go through all of this, mainly because of the fact that I've covered this in previous webinars, but the way that this is set up is pretty much the same. Nothing's really changed here. Just know that whatever changes you make here will sync to the local side of the firewall. Here we have our objects. Here is where we can create service objects or address objects. So here again, if we want to create an address object, here's where we can create address objects to apply a specific IP to an object that we create. And then we also have our service objects, where if you want to create a specific service object that we want to apply or reference in either a firewall rule or policy route, we can create that here. And again, Whatever you put down here will sync to the local side of the device. And then lastly here, we have our firewall settings. This is just going to be your DNS records, your host names, any dynamic DNS. So if you have a DNS server or a DNS account, you can put that information in here. And then we also have our authentication information. And then we also have our SIP signaling here. So we do have the SIP portion here in Nebula. So if you need to enable SIP signaling, you do have the ability to do that here and then put your timeouts. So again, same thing you would see on the local side. So this is Nebula. These are all the settings that you would find in Nebula. Now, if you want to do some monitoring, you can come down to monitor and we can monitor our VPN connection. If you have SecReporter connected, you can come here to look at SecReporter. And also we have our basic event log. Again, depending on your level of Nebula status, whether it be Pro or Base Pack, that's going to determine your log retention. So if you only have the Base Pack, which I have currently right now, you're only going to be able to see 24 hours of log retention. Now, as far as going into the local GUI of the device, we can do that by going to our dashboard and we can click on the firewall. And then after we click on the firewall, come straight down to the very bottom, and you'll see there's a couple of things I want to cover really quick before we go into that. We have the remote configurator, but what we can do here is configuration override. So this option is here because maybe you logged into the local GUI or you have a user that's logged in locally and they are making configuration changes. However, for some reason, maybe there was a blip on the internet, maybe the connection dropped for a second before it can make that configuration sync. You know, they added a VLAN, but you're not seeing that VLAN in Nebula. You know, you're trying to figure out, well, why haven't I seen that? Why don't I see that? Well, here we can do a configuration override. So we can force the configuration to apply the local GUI settings in Nebula. So this is always going to pull from the local side to Nebula, not the other way around. So if you're finding that the local side and the cloud side are not matching, but the cloud side is the correct configuration, you can use this option to force the local side to push the configuration to the cloud so that it stays in sync. So under Remote Configurator, we can come here and click on Establish. This is going to create a link for us to log into the device. It's going to open up a new browser window. It's going to open up a new tab. We can go right straight into here, and we can log into our firewall. So this gives us the ability to log directly into our firewall, and then what we're going to do is I'm going to go ahead and log right in. Now, when it comes to logging in this way, there's something that I need to point out as well, and that is when you onboard your firewall into Nebula, it's going to create a second account called support. That account, you can change the password in Nebula. There's a place to change it. So what that does is that gives you a Nebula, it's kind of like a Nebula password for logging into the GUI. You can use that, or you can use the admin. So if you have an administrator or you have a technician that you want to give them access from the Nebula side only, meaning that they can log in through Nebula and get to the dashboard from here, you would supply them with the support account, and they can log in with that account. You wouldn't give them the admin account. You could give them a support account that'll work for them on that side. So just be aware that there is a support account that is created, and if you ever try to create a support account, that's the reason why it won't let you. So here, logged in, you do get a different dashboard, of course, because it is the local side. Again, you're going to see very some similarities here. So if we come straight down here to network interface, we can see that the network interface series is going to be exactly kind of laid out the same way you would see on Nebula. We have our external interfaces and we have our local internal interfaces. You'll see that they're very, very similar. Now, we do have some differences here. We do have our trunk option here, and then we also do have some port statistics. So just because, they're the same, but this is laid out slightly different. The trunk here is going to be specifically if you need to do any specific type of load balancing algorithms. So you won't see that in Nebula as much as you will see it on the local side. So if you need to make some changes to your trunk, or you need to do a specific load balancing algorithm, if you have dual WAN, you would just come down into here and create a user-defined trunk, and then you can add your interfaces. This particular device only has one WAN interface, but if I had two, I would just go ahead and click, add the second one, and then what we could do is in our load balancing algorithm, we have an option of doing an active-passive connection, so we can make the WAN port 1 active. We can make WAN 2 passive, meaning that all traffic will flow out of WAN port 1 until WAN port 1 goes down, and then it will then kick in WAN port 2 as being the active option. So again, active-passive, if we want to do that, we would just put that secondary WAN port as passive. Now for our algorithms, we have 3 different types: weighted round robin, least load first, and spillover. Weighted round robin is going to be based on a specific weight. You can define the weight. The weight is going to be defined basically by your interface speed. So if your interface speed on WAN port 1 is 1 gig, and your WAN port 2 is half a gig, that's a 2-to-1 ratio. So it's going to deliver packets at a 2-to-1 ratio. It's going to push for every, 2 will go out WAN port 1, and then 1 will go out WAN port 2. So it does it as a ratio, weighted round robin. Least load first, meaning that if it looks at both WAN ports, and whatever WAN port is under the least amount of load, it'll push traffic out that one. And of course, spillover, meaning that when WAN port 1 is maxed out, any additional bandwidth will flow over to WAN port 2. So you could choose whichever weight balancer or whatever load balancing algorithm you choose. Now, for routing, of course, we have policy route and static route. So for our routing here, of course, again, we don't have the option for the application. That's going to be coming later. But again, you'll see that the settings are pretty similar to what you would see in Nebula. And again, if you make a change here, it will sync directly over to the Nebula side. NAT, same thing. You're going to see the same thing as well here. You're going to see that the actual ports and destinations and everything is pretty much the same. Now, this is something that really isn't, I didn't touch on the on the GUI of Nebula, but we do have bandwidth management that's available. So you can do bandwidth management on firewall, but it's going to be on the local side. Bandwidth management, you would just come down here, and what you would do is create a bandwidth management rule. So here we can specify whether it's going to be shared per user or per source IP. So what that means is that if you set up a bandwidth management rule and you set it to say, we'll say 50 megabits per second on the upload and 50 megabits per second on the download. So what that means is that it's shared between all, if you leave it at shared, it's shared between all users. Meaning that all users will share the 50 megabits per second if you have it set to this. We can specify a specific source. So if we choose, say, our LAN 1 subnet, anyone that's connected to the LAN 1 subnet, everybody's going to be, the pool is going to be 50 megabits per second. And then once, if a user hits up 45 megabits per second, that means there's only 5 megabits per second left over. So that's what it means by shared, meaning that everybody is consuming from that pool. If you want to do per user, that basically means that each user on the LAN subnet, if you have it set to a specific user, so we can do a per user, meaning that if a user has to log in, if you have web authentication, you do it on a per user basis. And then, of course, finally, we have per source IP address. That means every device that has an IP address will get a limit of 50 megabits per second. So this is how you can set up your own bandwidth management. And then again, here we do have applications. So while policy routing doesn't have this, we can do an application group. Now for the application group, these are all the applications that are pulled specifically from the application control. So if you want to specify anybody who's using Hulu, they only get 5 megabits per second up and down per source IP address. You can set that up, and if you want to do it on a specific subnet, you can. Next, we have our ALG. This is going to be the SIP ALG and the FTP. Most likely, you probably will not use this option. However, we do support a new feature called SIP pinholing, but normally you wouldn't really see the need for SIP. Usually, most of the time, your provider will tell you to turn SIP off. So if they do require you to do it or change the ports, you would just come down to ALG to do that. Now, for multicast, we do have an option for multicast for upstream and downstream. This is something that's not in Nebula yet, but we do have it locally on the GUI. So if you need to do any type of IGMB proxies, you would have to log into the GUI locally or through Nebula into the GUI of the actual firewall itself to configure this option. Again, VPN. So for the VPN options, again, same thing. We have site-to-site, and we also have remote access VPN. So something that you'll notice that on remote access VPN here is that instead of it being a zip file for the client VPN software, you have to click on each one individually. If you want to do the sector extender, but for the script itself, you can download the zip file. So if you want to get the sector extender client software, that's our paid version. You can click on either of those. It'll take you to the site to actually download it. Or if you just want to use a built-in client, you can use the download link. Now, something here you'll see this is new is that instead of setting up the actual interface IP address, you can use the Nebula assigned domain name. It'll actually pull the Nebula assigned domain name from Nebula. So instead, and this is what it uses for the VPN script. So when you set up a remote access VPN and you set up the VPN script in Nebula, it's going to use the Nebula DNS domain name to point to the IP address of your firewall. So instead of using the actual interface IP address, it's going to use the Nebula name. And you can switch back and forth if you want to, but normally if you're going to set up the VPN script to set up a remote access VPN client using the built-in client software on those OSs, it's going to end up using the Nebula domain name. Now here we also have the SSL VPN still available on the GUI itself, so we do support that still. What we do have here, which is a little bit different, and this is something that's going to be applied to the IPsec VPN as well, is that when you're using the Secu Extender client, the Zycel Secu Extender client, you will see that in order to pull the configuration for the provisioning, you have to connect on a specific port. On the SSL VPN side, you can specify a custom port for it to pull the VPN configuration from. On the IPsec version, however, right now, you have to use 443 or whatever the login page is for the firewall. So in the next update for the USG Flex H series, which is coming out, I believe, next month, you will be able to specify a customized port for the IPsec VPN provisioning. But for right now, it's going to be bound to whatever the management port is of the firewall. So I know that does give some people a little bit of pause, because in order to do that, you do have to open up your firewall to the outside to pull. You have to open up 443 to the outside to pull that provisioning script. For now, what I would say is don't do that. Just download the script or download the configuration file. Again, just download that configuration file right here. Download this. It'll have the IPsec VPN .pgv file that you can import into your Secu Extender. So don't worry about trying to do the provisioning from directly from the IPsec VPN client. Once that update occurs on the Flex 8 series side, where you can specify your own unique port to pull the configuration, then I would say go ahead and start doing provisioning because it does make it a lot easier. The reason being is that anytime you make a change, if you decide to go from, say, on your tunnel, you want split tunneling, or you want to do full tunnel, anytime you make a change on the VPN side, whether it be in Nebula or the GUI side, if you're using the VPN script, you have to download that script all over again and then resend it out to everybody. That's where the plus side is on the VPN security center client, because any changes you make pull directly from the provisioning script instead of having to send out the script every single time to each person and have them install it. So again, I would wait until the new update comes out that allows you to specify a custom port for the IPsec VPN, so that way provisioning becomes a lot more easier. Now, something that the Cloud Nebula does not have is Tailscale VPN. This is something that I will be doing a webinar on next month on how to configure Tailscale VPN as a third-party option. If you do not wish to use our IPsec VPN or any other IPsec VPN, you can use the Tailscale. We do support it for remote clients to connect in. There are a lot of advantages to this, and I will go over that in next month's webinar. But just know that if you want to use Tailscale VPN, which is a valid third-party option, you can use Tailscale to your USG Flex. Next, for your policy control, same thing you're going to see in the Nebula side. Have your firewall rules that you can set up all your firewall rules here. Nothing new. You're going to see the same thing on the local side and in the cloud. We do have the DOS prevention policy. Again, that was just a button that you turned on, enabled on the firewall side settings in Nebula, so that's present here as well. Now, we also do have IP spoofing protection. That's going to be something that's going to be on the local GUI itself. It's not in Nebula, but this is something that has been pushed to the local GUI and eventually will make its way into Nebula. But you can set up a spoofing prevention where you can include trusted IP MAC pairs in your basically on the list, so that if anybody tries to spoof your MAC address but doesn't have an IP address that matches, it'll automatically block them. So you can have this spoofing prevention in your firewall network. Next here we have again our session control. This is something that was available on the Nebula Cloud side. So again, you can access both of these on either or. Now we do support a captive portal on the local side. I won't go into too much detail about captive portal because most of the time, most people are either using the AT to do the captive portal, or they're just using the, there is a built-in kind of captive portal in Nebula, but I find you have a little bit more control doing it here a little bit, but most people are just using the captive portal built in on the EP side to handle any type of captive portals, because most of the time people are connecting over access points to set up the captive portal. But just know that you can set up a captive portal on the local side as well. Here, again, address objects, service objects, you can set up the same thing, all your address objects. You can do geo IP as well. So on your address objects, if you want to block a specific country, you can then add that particular region. And what's great about this is it is grouped with, I believe, the content filtering. So as long as you have content filtering, the geo IP update will go through and it will update your list. And what you can do with this is, if you want, you can create custom rules. But for the most part, you would just use the built-in signature database for the geo IP. And if you want to make a firewall rule, you can block a specific region or country from hitting your firewall, or it'll hit the firewall but be denied, or you can just have it drop the traffic so that they don't get a response back. There's a lot of things that you can do with geo IP, but this is basically where all that information is stored. Again, service objects, you can create a service object and then you combine service objects into a specific group. So if you have a group of services that you need to apply to a firewall rule or a policy route or NAT rule, you can then put the services into a group and then just reference that one object that has all of the groups in, or all of the IPs, or sorry, services in that specific group. Zones, pretty self-explanatory. Basically, when you set up an IP or an interface, you go assign it to a zone, and that zone is what the firewall looks at. So you can set this up on both the local and the GUI side. And then finally here we have our scheduling. So if you want to set up a specific schedule to do something such as, let's just say that you want to have a policy route that works on schedule, or a firewall rule that works on schedule, you can set up a schedule on the local GUI. Again, here our security services pretty much the same as you would see on the cloud side. The setup is pretty much the same. Again, I won't go through all of this just because I've covered this in previous webinars on how to set up your security policies. But just know that the way that it's set up locally is now pretty much the way that you set it up on the cloud. Just one caveat, just know for application control and content filtering, those are all policy rule based. So you create a policy or a rule. Again, the policy could be block for app control. You can say, I want to block streaming media. I want to block communication. I want to block torrents. I want to block, a group of applications. Once you create that policy that blocks those particular things, you then have to apply it to a packet direction, which basically means the firewall. Meaning that you apply that rule that says you're blocking those specific applications to a specific subnet. So if you want to prevent, your VLAN users, if it's a corporation, your social media, you want to block social media for your workers, and the workers are connecting on VLAN 10. Okay, so then you create the rule to block social media, and then you apply that to VLAN 10. But of course, your marketing team needs to have social media. You do not apply that profile to the VLAN that contains the marketing team. So again, when it comes to app control and content filtering, you create a rule or a policy, and then you apply that policy in a packet direction which is tied to the firewall rule. So that's always a two-step process. Create the profile, apply the profile to a packet direction. It's going to be the same thing on the local GUI, and it's also going to be the same thing on Nebula Cloud. But for everything else, reputation filter, anti-malware, sandbox, IPS, IP exception, SSL inspection, all of that stuff, you're going to find that you do not need to apply that to a specific route or subnet. It's basically just a global setting. Now, what you'll find here on the local side is we do support wireless, we do support an AP controller option. You won't find that in Nebula because Nebula itself is a controller. So if you have a need to, if you have a customer that does not want to be in Nebula at all, there are people that choose not to be in Nebula, but you want to be able to manage access points, you can then use the built-in controller on the Flex 8 series to manage your access points. It's going to be the same as it was on the HTTP Flex. Basically, you would set up your access point. There's something called CapLab, which you would go out and find the controller, which is a firewall. Make sure that you do not assign those access points to Nebula, because you can't control it in Nebula and the local site connected to a firewall at the same time. If it's managed by, if the AP is being managed by the firewall, it can be managed by Nebula. So just keep that in mind. And that's pretty much everything when it comes to the local side GUI. Now, when it comes to which one would you use, Nebula versus local management, you have options to go both ways because it is hybrid. You can manage it locally, you can manage it through the cloud in the Nebula Cloud, or you can manage it through the local GUI through Nebula Cloud. So you have three different ways to get to your management interface. It's really going to be dependent on what you are most comfortable with, and also it's going to be dependent on if there's a specific need for a specific function that doesn't exist in Nebula, you're going to go straight towards the GUI. So again, two ways to reach the local GUI, either behind the firewall, three ways actually. Behind the firewall to get to the local GUI, connect it to a VPN, We always suggest you connect to a VPN if you really need to access the local GUI, or again, you can come in through Nebula, set up the remote configurator, and access the local GUI. So you do have ways to reach the local site GUI if you need to. But again, when it comes to managing everything, you can do more than 95%, 96, 97% of everything in the cloud. There are some edge cases, again, where if you need bandwidth management, if you need to do, if you do bandwidth management, you want to do, say, multicast. There are some edge cases where there are some things that are not 100% in Nebula right now. We are getting closer and closer to full parity between the two, but as of right now, you should be able to do most of the things that you're able to do in Nebula. And you have that ability. What's great about Nebula is that it's accessible. You log into your account, have everything single pane of glass, see all of your devices all in one go, and you have your monitoring tools in Nebula as well. Now, I will say that there is a couple of things. You can see your clients, and this is your overall clients connected to, in this particular firewall. I do have a firewall. I have an access point. You can see all of your clients here. You can see wired and wireless, but you don't have the sense of the same kind of DHCP table that you would see, say, on your firewall. So if we go straight back to our dashboard, and we go straight and look at our DHCP, it's a little bit different because here we have all the DHCP that's going to specific locations. So if I do all, I can see all of the DHCP if it's being handed out. You can reserve from here, but you can also reserve in Nebula as well. So you can click on something, you can click a policy, and then you can apply a specific policy, or we can reserve it if we want to from here. But I find it a lot easier to reserve directly from the firewall itself. So if you're creating a reservation list, you can create it pretty much either way, but I find it a lot easier to, say, click on something and then click the reserve IP. I have a couple things that are reserved already because we have reserved, but if I just say come here, I can reserve the IP. So it just makes it a lot easier here. Whereas Nebula, you kind of have to fish around and find as well. So it's just either or, whichever you find, whatever your preference is. But again, this comes down to clicking. Okay, and then that's going to be it for this webinar. I do apologize for the late start. I had some technical difficulties a little bit with Zoom and everything, but I'm going to go ahead and open up the floor to any questions that you have, and I will stay for a little bit here to answer some questions. One question has, does the IPsec VPN script run on Linux-based OS for laptops? No, not as of yet. Only right now the script works for only Mac OS and iOS, and those are kind of like the only Linux-based in a way. But no, we don't have any. If you're talking like for like Red Hat or Ubuntu, no, we don't have anything for those as of yet. I know that there have been some requests for that, and I'll have to check and see where those requests are in the pipeline. But there have been some general inquiries about Linux-based IPsec VPN scripts. Good question. There's another question that came up. Will there be a counter of how often the firewall rule was used? I believe there already is on the local side already. It gives you a hit counter. Let me see if I can find that really quick. Because usually when it comes to that, you end up seeing something with, it really kind of pays more towards IPS because you want to be able to know how many times that firewall rule has been hit. So let me give me a second here. And if it's not, I can inquire about it because I do remember seeing or hearing something about that, because I know that you want to be able to know if the amount of times a specific firewall rule has been triggered, specifically on the WAN side. You'll end up seeing, you want to know if you're getting maybe a DOS attack. So let's see. See, I don't think it's on here, but no, it's not. Yeah, I'll have to look into that. But I do remember hearing or seeing something about that, and I will have to get back to you on that one. Next question, will the DHCP reserved host names in the firewall automatically sync to SecuReporter? The problem with SecuReporter, I wouldn't say it's a problem, but it's more of the way the SecuReporter was designed, is that it's going to give you the top 10 usage statistics. It's not going to give you a full report on every single user. When it comes to the DHCP host names, I have to check. I don't believe it does. It does it on IP. Really, when it comes to SecuReporter, I look at SecuReporter more as the security side. And as far as I know, I know it does IP address. It might do the host name from the firewall because it should pull that information. But when it comes to SecuReporter itself, it's going to be looking more at the security side. So it's more designed to give you a report of how often a security incident was triggered. So, for instance, your antivirus, how many times the antivirus picked up a virus, and it will tell you exactly the virus name or the signature of the virus, and it'll also tell you the destination and the source. And most of the time, I believe for that, it's by IP address and not by host name for that particular report. So it does give you reports on that. It gives you content filtering reports. It gives you reports on how often a specific website or category was pinged. It's almost the same as what you would see on the dashboard of the firewall when you have application control turned on and content filtering. So it gives you a similar report as that, but I do believe, I know it's by IP address, but it might also give you the host name as well. Okay, now we'll leave the floor open for another 5 minutes for questions that you may have. Yes, the question was, there was a question asked about will the recording be available to later attendees? Yes, it will be. This was recorded, so once this is over, the recording, I believe, should go out to all attendees afterwards. Question about which features will be in the next firmware. Right now, the only one that I know of for certain right now is the port mapping for the IPsec VPN. A lot of things that have been on the roadmap have kind of, things are kind of fluid. So I don't have a hard list of, a hard solidified list of things that are going to be available. I do know that as far as feature support, I do know IPv6, they're looking more into that. They're looking into BGP routing. I think BGP routing is coming, I'm going to say, mid-2026. But I don't have a real solid list. Won't have one probably to the end of this month because usually the firmware release, the next one should be coming out roughly in January.
You want to do another one and you have the similar issues?
Okay, another question. The IPsec VPN script uses the default IP address of the interface. We have a site that uses dynamic DNS host name since the IP address changes. Once the script is installed and I change the IP, the host name, the local VPN service stops working and we use the dynamic DNS service for IPsec VPN. On the client side, as of right now, no, because there's no way to map that. I think that in the future there's going to be an option for that, for some type of mapping, because I know it's not available, but I think that that's something that's going to be looked into and added in the future. I know that there was a couple of requests for that, so I definitely would look out for that in a future release, because I know that there are people that do want to use DNS host names for IP changes. Right, because I know if you're talking about like on the WAN, you're talking about the WAN interface, you're talking about the local side, like using a host name for the local side IP address. Because if you're using a dynamic DNS on the WAN, that shouldn't matter. But I'm guessing you mean on the local side, correct? Yeah. So I'll look into that. I think that's something that's going to be added in the future. Just because I know that people use a lot of host names locally to their devices. The moment you change that, there's no way for it to recognize what that host is. The only thing that I would say you could do is set up a record, a DNS record locally on the firewall to do that. You just go into the DNS and just put the host name so people resolve it. That's one option to do. That should work for you. But again, that does create a little bit more work for you to do on your side. So we'll definitely take a look into that. Question about a roadmap will be cool and community friendly and better planning. Again, the problem with that is sometimes we get roadmaps. That go 6 months into the future, and just because of the nature of things and resources that are available, sometimes half the stuff doesn't even make it to at that time. Some things get pushed back. So I believe there is some hesitancy to publicly release that information just because things change so often. If you look at the USG Flex H series, how there were a lot of things when it came out. There were a lot of things that were promised that, unfortunately, due to circumstances that were beyond our control, our engineering's control, there's a lot of things that got pushed back. So I think that they're kind of hesitant to doing that. However, there are some things that we can, talk about in terms of what's going to be available that we know that's going to be pretty much set in stone. There's times where we were something that was promised that, unfortunately, it, got pushed back because it just wasn't ready in time. So it's kind of this the nature of the game right now. But we will talk to our engineers to see about being more open to providing maybe a roadmap for things that are 100% set in stone, things that have already been worked on, and that are pretty much ready to go. I just don't know what that timeline is going to look at in terms of how often they would be able to provide that information. whether it be a week before release or 2 weeks before release. I do know that when you get a notification for Nebula, or when you get a notification for the firewall when the new firmware is about to release, usually it's about a week or two before that release comes out, and they usually have information in the release notes as to what's going to be coming out on that particular release. But as far as things further on down the road, it's a little bit more harder to forecast. All right, if there's no more questions, I'm going to go ahead and end this webinar. Again, I do apologize for the late start, and I do appreciate everybody for joining today. The next webinar that I will be conducting will be on the Tailscale VPN. So if you are interested on other third-party options for VPN, I hope that you'll be able to join. But until then, I hope everyone has a happy and safe holidays, and see you in 2026. Have a good afternoon, everyone. Bye.